States are reopening their economies this week as more than half of the nation's governors scale back their state's restrictions. Now, governors, though, are taking very different approaches in developing plans to reopen their business, or reopen business in that state. So for more on this, I want to bring in Ed Mills, a Washington policy analyst at Raymond James. And Ed, let me start with the reopening. I guess, what do you think states need to keep in mind when they're developing their own plans about how to reopen their state's economies?
Yeah, I think a lot of the guidelines that have been put out have been pretty clear of what states need to do. It's a question on whether or not they're going to follow it and if they're going to have the ability. So in the gating criteria that were released, you want to see for phase one a decline in new cases. You want to make sure hospitals have capacity, and you want to make sure there's robust testing, not only for COVID-19, but as well as antibodies. Ultimately, this is supposed to be a three-step process, something that will take 45 days or longer to fully achieve. And you can restart if you have a fall back. But I do think that the thing that really continues to be the issue is the lack of testing and a lack of a coordination at the federal level.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about coordination. Just how crucial do you think it is that we do see coordination between national and state leadership?
I think it's incredibly important because, just because there is a border that exists between two states does not mean that really changes the way one person lives on the other side of the street. You have seen more regional coordination among the governors. You see coordination within counties and cities. But it is really important. And what we did this week, we also looked worldwide, and we think that the areas that have done the best so far of opening up have been able to clearly communicate to their citizens exactly what is expected of them and having clear coordination at that national and local level.
Yeah, talking about, I wanted to drill down into the local level because it was interesting. So there's a county out in California that's defying Governor Newsom's shutdown order, reopening non-essential businesses, allowing diners inside of their restaurants. What do you think the risk is of not having a unified approach at the local level?
Yeah, I mean, the risk is that there will be a resurgence in areas where we don't have robust testing capacity and where there is community spread. This is a difficult thing when you can't necessarily see it, if you don't necessarily know someone who has it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We do have a history of strong, civil liberties here in the country. I don't think there is a strong desire to have aggressive crackdowns. We've talked to psychologists about how open of a society we've been. So enforcement really is up to the individual and up to the leaders kind of giving us the right message.
And we've had a number of guests on the show over the last couple of weeks, and they've been talking about how the economy is going to change because of the coronavirus outbreak going forward, and how this is just the start of some of those changes. What do you think that means for, or what do you think the overall economy is going to look like? I guess, what areas do you think will experience the most change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is going to depend upon what control we have over COVID-19 and kind of what, not only the control over it, but what are the therapeutics and ultimately what is a vaccine? There is a scenario that unless we have kind of the ability to have a good workable therapeutic that can be used or a vaccine, that the economy is going to incrementally, slowly open absent herd immunity. So I think social distancing is here to stay for the time being. Strong social kind of strong personal hygiene is absolutely here to stay. And the real question for the economy, as you talk to small business owners, as you talk to restaurants, if they're only able to open up at 25, 50% capacity, is that a viable business model? And what level of bankruptcy, what level of closures are we going to see if we are in this prolonged interim period?
And I want to get your thoughts on the fiscal response that we've seen at the federal level. So now the conversation has shifted to what the next stimulus package will look like, what it should look like. What do you think the next phase should look like? What do you think are the areas that are the most in need at this point?
Yeah, so we have already done north of $3 trillion. This is the largest fiscal relief experiment in the history of the world. But any economist that I've spoken to says there is a need for more. At the top of the list probably is funding for state and local governments. That has, I think, bipartisan support on the Hill, but the way in which you do it, I think, is a lot more complicated. At the top of the list, as I have heard from Republicans on the Hill, is making sure businesses have liability protection as they reopen and are able to kind of have that funding targeted because they don't want to be seen as just kind of bailing out the decisions of state and local leaders.
And real quick, I want to get your thoughts on stimulus checks too. What do you think should be done about the direct payment to Americans? Should there be more stimulus checks? And how big of a boost do you think will actually end up being to the U.S. economy?
I think that's a great question. I've always thought that the CARES Act, that big $2.3 trillion bill, was good for about 2 months. We're about a month into it. If we have this same level of economic need a month from now, by the end of this month, we'll need to have a round 2 that is equal or greater to what we've already done.
All right. And Mills, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today.